Program Director, distinguished guests, the leadership of the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, ladies and gentlemen, I'm deeply grateful and delighted at the honor of being invited to join this august occasion and also to say a few words to you. I realize that the forum is an important one, generally, but it is particularly important this year because the issue of embracing diversity has been linked with the commemoration of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Thank you. I'm delighted to be aligned to the noble cause of embracing diversity in pursuit of peaceful coexistence as people in our shared habitat, planet Earth. As somebody who comes from South Africa, I can relate to the fall of the Berlin Wall because we had a wall falling too in our country, the wall of apartheid. As you will recall, apartheid divided people according to race and to some extent cultural diversity. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of apartheid have come to transcend national importance to become symbols of integration and healing across divisions in the world. This conference is particularly timely. The world is at crossroads when it comes to peaceful human existence, or rather peaceful coexistence among humanity. Every day, there are rumors of war, there are wars. We have problems with terrorism. In Africa, beyond terrorism, we talk about girls that have been taken away to be sold into slavery or something worse than that. But one of the questions that arises today is, do we need more guns to combat terrorism, armed conflict, and all of the problems we face that undermine peace today? Or should we explore more peace measures? Anyway, why should you care about peace if your own country is not undergoing any problems and if there is stability in your own country? I thought to answer that question, we could look at a poem, a very old poem by James Kinney. I will not read the poem because I'm not a poet. I've been informed in any event that people understand it better when I translate it instead of recite it. The poem is really about 6 people trapped by happenstance, according to James Kinney. They're sitting around a fire that is dying, and each one of them has a log or a piece of wood. It's dark, it's bitterly cold. The first man looks at the fire that is dying and looks at the log in his hand and decides, should I put it in the fire or should I not? As he does so, he notices across the fire that there is a person who belongs to a different church than his, not even a different religion, not even Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, etc., just from a different church. He looks at his log and he decides to withhold it because he decides that he will not benefit somebody who comes from a different church than his. The second person looks at his log and the dying fire. He looks across and sees somebody from a different race than his. He decides, this particular race has benefited a lot before, I will not let this person benefit from my log. he keeps his log. The next person is a poor person. He looks across, he sees a rich man, and then he says, the filthy rich, I will not let them benefit from my log, and he decides to withhold his log. Just across, the rich person is also looking at the poor man, and he looks and says, the lazy poor, why must they benefit from my log? And he decides to keep his log as well. Then there's another person from a different race than the previous one, who looks across and sees the other person from a different race. He decides also to keep his log because he won't let it benefit a person from outside his race. The last person is a mercenary, somebody who's never in his life done anything but for gain. He looks across and says, these people are not in a position to pay me. Why must I let them benefit from my log? And he decides to keep his log. James Kinney ends the poem like in the title. The title of the poem is The Cold Within. He says, they did not die from the cold without. They died from the cold within. All of us are placed at different times in our lives in positions where we have a log in our hands that we can put into the fire to promote global solidarity in the pursuit of peace. But sometimes we decide to withhold that piece of wood or that log. And sometimes we place it. But as I was reflecting on this conference, though, I just wondered whether we are even beyond the point where James Kinney was, where the people only had a log that they could throw into the fire and keep the fire burning, so that they themselves could get life, which was light and warmth from the fire, and stop themselves from dying. I was just wondering whether today the positions we find ourselves in are where it's not just about withholding the log, it's really about whether or not you're not sitting there taking logs from the fire itself and helping the fire to die. What are the things we could do to cause the fire to die? Some of those things were identified at a forum I attended last year, June. It's called the Tollback Forum in Sweden. There, people come together from the rest of the world, brought together by the shared understanding that we have a collective destiny as humanity, regardless of who we are and regardless of where we come from. They spoke about things, though, that we do in different parts of the world or don't do in different parts of the world that either promote human solidarity or undermine human solidarity. And some of the things that they spoke about are illicit flows of capital from countries. They also spoke about companies that invest in certain countries and harness those countries' wealth without beneficiating the communities, where instead of the communities being left being better than they were when they were found, we found ourselves in a situation whereby investments lead to a situation where the investor gets out with wealth, but those left behind are left poorer than found before. And they brought in companies that are backing that trend. Companies like IKEA, Volvo, etc. I'm not advertising for those, but there should be more. They were just showing how those companies are working with local communities to build sustainable livelihoods. Because they've come to understand that we are one human habitat. And if we hurt the earth in Honduras, we may temporarily not feel it somewhere else in the world, but eventually we will feel the pain. They spoke about the bribing of foreign public officials to distort tenders in those countries or government contracts in those countries, and to distort policies that, again, temporarily you may benefit from those interventions, but eventually it creates a distorted world. It creates conflict in those countries, and eventually it catches up with the entire world. Incidentally, the idea of an interconnected world that we were discussing at the Torbeck Forum, and the need to work together to create a better world, is also something that underpins the efforts of the World Justice Forum. The World Justice Forum promotes the rule of law in all of the countries, with the understanding that when the rule of law suffers, say in South Africa or anywhere in the world, there is an impact in Sweden, and there's an impact here, for example, in Germany. As I reflected on this, I'm challenging people in this forum, and that's not something that has to be discussed conclusively today, but you can take it back to your countries, is reflecting on some of the things that we're doing today in the pursuit of peace, democracy, and a better world. Are they building walls, or are they dismantling walls? In this regard, when, for example, we support with armed conflict in countries, is that dismantling walls or creating more walls? What about the efforts we're putting into fighting terrorism in the world? Are they dismantling walls, or are they perhaps accidentally creating more walls? In Africa, we've just experienced what is called the Arab Spring in the northern part of Africa. We were meeting recently under the auspices of the AU and the African Ombudsman and Mediators Association, asking ourselves, or some of the speakers raised the question, was it an Arab Spring? Because spring is a beautiful thing that comes before summer. But if you go to the children and the women who were devastated through bombing, are they experiencing any spring, or are they experiencing any winter? I do not know, but those are the things we have to reflect on. I come from a country where, thanks to our leaders, there was a decision to proceed with dismantling walls, but through peaceful means. Thanks to persons such as Nelson Mandela, who decided that talking would yield better results than the question of who has better guns than the other, or who has more guns than the other. Because as Lao Tzu says, you may win the battle, but winning the battle does not mean winning the war. And yet, peaceful negotiations may bring about lasting peace. We're not saying, of course, that 20 years into democracy, there are no walls in South Africa. There are still soft walls. But what I can indicate is that we have a constitution that gives us a roadmap for dismantling those walls. Whilst we keep rising and falling, we have something that guides us into building the South Africa we want. And the South Africa we want is one where every person's life is improved and every person's human potential is released. Every person's human dignity is respected within a context of human rights and human freedoms that are equally enjoyed by all. I come from a history of people working together to destroy those walls. Nelson Mandela and his contemporaries themselves had to work across race, color, and culture. If you look at the trial, the Rivonia trial that led to Mandela going to jail, the people that were working together to dismantle walls with their hammers and chisels were white, Indian, colored, and black, because those are distinctions that are made in South Africa. What is little known, though, is that women of South Africa have led when it came to dismantling walls. From the historic March of 1956, you can see women acting across race. The leadership of that particular march were 20,000 women across races and cultures marched to the seat of power, the seat of apartheid power, which was the Union Buildings in Pretoria, was led by Lillian Ngoyi, who is African, Helen Joseph, who was white, Rahina Musa, who was Indian, and Sophia de Bruyn, who was regarded as colored. Women have cooperated to draft 2 women's charters, mapping out the South Africa they want. There are synergies between what you're doing here and what the rest of the world is doing. It is therefore my sincere pleasure and honor to join you today as you discuss how to dismantle walls. Of course, these are soft walls, these are social walls, these are economic walls, so that we may live more peacefully together. At the Tallbeck Forum, the theme was curious. How on earth can we live together? The answer was, like it or not, we already do live together. The earth is integrated, the clouds are integrated, the internet is integrated. What happens in India can be felt in South Africa. So the question is not how can we live peacefully together? Because we are living together. So the question is, how can we live peacefully? How can we make sure that our living together translate into mutual benefit and sustainable, peaceful coexistence? Going back to the issue of the logs, what we called upon today is to look at what kind of log is in your hand so that you can contribute to the flame of human solidarity. But the second question I was raising beyond James Kinney's poem is, are you not removing a log that is already in the fire? Some of the logs we have are logs that can contribute to social justice because there can be no peace without justice. The rule of law, because some of the conflicts in our different parts of the continent are people who feel let down by the rule of law, either because laws are not properly consulted with, either because there's no consistency or proper compliance with the constitutions, the judicial system is weak, structures are weak. I come from an institution whose log is to reinforce the justice system, to reinforce governance, and to reinforce democracy. The institution is called the Public Protector in South Africa. In other countries, it's called the Ombudsman Institution. We have been created to strengthen and support constitutional democracy by helping people to exact accountability in the exercise of public power. We know that in democracies, there's often people who are voiceless. Although democracy is about government of the people by the people, but there are the left behind, either because they're minorities or the ones who lost the election. Many countries have created ombudsman institutions to reinforce the checks and balances in the democracy by giving everyone a voice. In South Africa, we believe that when it comes to this particular forum, the dismantling of walls, an institution such as the Public Protector is important because some of those minorities that are not able to express themselves through political channels and they don't have money to go through the judicial system have another safety valve to engage meaningfully with those in government. These institutions, such as the Public Protector, are there to ensure that they curb excesses in the exercise of public power. That would reduce social alienation from all groups. We don't claim it's the only institution that helps people exact accountability in the exercise of public power and control over state resources. We're saying it's one of many that makes sure that there's justice, that makes sure that when people feel that those who are in public power are taking resources into their own communities and into their own pockets, The alternative for people is not to form their own paramilitary structures to try and get themselves into government, but they can go into these institutions and exact accountability, and then democracy is reinforced. In other words, they get another voice even if they don't have a political voice. I was at a conference 1 week ago at the AU where we were talking about silencing guns in Africa by 2020, that is 6 years from now. And the AU agreed that an institution such as a public protector is one of the avenues we must strengthen to strengthen accountability in the exercise of public power. But generally, what was agreed to was that we really need to strengthen institutions in society, that the barrel of the gun is a temporary solution. It is not a long-term solution. What am I saying then going forward is, again, to say thank you for this opportunity and good luck as you proceed with this conference on dismantling walls. Whilst we celebrate the following of this particular wall, we must think of what walls exist in our society, whether they're cultural, economic, or social, and what are we doing as persons in our little corners to make sure that we build the fires that will, we build the fires that will destroy remaining walls that divide societies. And some of those walls are social injustices, as I've indicated, an accountable state, and the failure to extend equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms to everyone in society. I thank you for organizing this conference and wish you the best as you proceed to discuss, and I hope that the outcomes of this conference are not just going to be felt here in Germany, and they're not going to be just linked to the falling of the Berlin Wall, but these will be taken to our respective countries and regions, and that all of us will play roles in making sure that no walls are built, not even walls that are built as we claim to be fighting terrorism or as we claim to be strengthening democracies in certain countries. But just lastly, to thank the government of Germany, which has supported us in South Africa through a program called GIZ. And most of the support is given to the African Ombudsman Research Center, where I'm chairperson, and the center is building the Ombudsman Institution in Africa, because we believe there that through our contribution to good governance and democracy, we can create societies where there's social justice, and we can also contribute to governments that govern in a manner that includes everyone and that makes sure that resources in all of these states go to every community. Thank you.